Well, apologies for the slightly slow start today. It is definitely worth the wait. Welcome to Creative Conversations here at University of Glasgow. My name is Zoe Strachan, and I have the easy job today of simply introducing you to a very exciting Creative Conversations takeover. So I will hand over to our guests to tell you more about it. But before I do so, thank you, as always, to the Ferguson Bequest and the University Chapel for hosting us today, and enjoy the event.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Laynie Browne, and this is Lesley Harrison, who's traveled here today to be here. We're so happy to be talking about her work, and Leanne Browne, I'm so happy that you're here. And I just want to say thank you to Colin Hurd, who organized this event, and wishing him well because he's not able to be here today. He's not feeling well. So thank you, Colin. And without further ado, we're going to jump in and talk about two poems from Lesley's newest book called Kitchen Music. So the first one is Woo as in wound, and then the second one is Rune poems. So I was hoping you might read, and then we will discuss.
Okay, thank you. Also, apologies from me. I've had another brush with the dreaded COVID, which has left me with a bit of a tickle, but I've got my water just here. It's nice to start with this poem because this poem came out of a setting similar to this. I went to a concert in Dundee, the town where I grew up, which is on the edge, just inside the estuary of the River Tay, and Dundee was famous for whaling, and when other towns, Leith and Aberdeen and Peterhead, gave up going to the Arctic or the Antarctic for whales, there were still ships from Dundee going north and then south to the whaling. So it has a very strong folk history as well as material history to do with the whales and the whaling. And where I live, a bit further north of Dundee, just north of Arbroath, I'm right on the edge of a cliff, and there's you can see the whole panorama, more than 180 degrees of the North Sea, and you would have been able to see from the end of the village, there's a wee shed called the Lookout, and you would have been able to see the whale ships from Leith and Dundee travelling north and disappearing over the horizon. And of course you would have no way of knowing in those times when they would come back, if they would come back, if you'd ever see these people again or these ships, or if when they came back they would be horribly maimed by the frost or by their confrontation with the ice or the whales, or whether they would come back incredibly rich, enough to keep their extended family going over the whole of the next winter and maybe beyond. So they really were going into a known place, a place where a lot of the rules were reversed, and that place I feel is just visible and no more on the horizon. I feel we're on the very edge, the temperate edge of that very uncertain, very strange of a world. So anyway, I heard this John Cage piece performed in an old church, or not quite as grand as this, but the layout was very like this, and the players, the chorus were from Capella Nova, and if you know the piece, it's a call and response piece, and the instruction John Cage gives to the singers is only to do with how they pronounce each letter of the word whale. The singers are just singing the letters of the word whale to each other. So the music isn't how the tempo slightly changes and how the pitch changes, but the Capella Nova singers, they also moved around the church, so sometimes they were behind us and sometimes they were singing to somebody away at the far end, and it absolutely made my hair stand on end, especially as we were up on the side of the hill overlooking the old whaling sheds, and the shape of the Tay estuary there is almost a whale. If you really want it to be, you can see this. So you just have to imagine these sounds being called back and forward to each other round a building, a lovely echoey building like this. So, woo as in wound. Woo as in wound. Ha as in hunt. Ah as in raft. As in fall. As in breach. Woo as in bow. Ha as in tump. Ah, as in slight. As in blink. As in swell. Woo, as in fluke. Huh, as in tongue. Ah, as in ebb. As in oil. As in jaw. Woo, as in run. Huh, as in calf. Ah, as in eye. As in blow. As in breath. Woo, as in sound. Ha, as in hull. Ah, as in wash. As in shelve. As in dive.
Amazing. It's amazing to hear you read it. And I was really curious to hear how you would read it, and to hear you read it in the space. It's so beautiful. I guess that the first thing that comes to mind hearing you read it now is that how the focus on the individual letters and the sounds and the acrostic of the word whale that's going down the page. There's this sense of time that is extraordinary, and you said it makes the hair stand on end. Like there's something uncanny, and I think part of it has to do with the shifting in time that happens as we're slowing down, breaking down the word.
Yeah, I think it's the soundscape of that whole process that interests me, the language of that whole process of the hunting of the whales. And I can imagine that, well, I know from reading that when they saw a whale, when a whale sounded, when they saw the smoke, they called it, from the blowhole not far off, or when there was a sense that a whale was about, they had to go very quiet because, of course, sound travels so much better through water. And so there was a lot of periods of silence during the process of the hunt and a lot of listening. And so that's what I was thinking of when I wrote it, when I was looking for places where those later sounds would have appeared during the process of chasing the whale. That's what I was thinking of when it kind of came together. And that would have been a long process, as you say. That would have gone on, might have been very short, it might have gone on for hours and hours. So a long time to stay quiet.
Wow.
Yeah, it reminds me of a score of a musical score that people could perform, like a John Cage piece. And are you ever interested in like giving it over to people to perform somehow, or is that something you would ever do, or is it more just, you think it's more a quiet poem?
I have to say, I've slowed down a lot when I've read it. I've realised that I really need to make more silence in between each of the letters. So the more I read this, the slower it gets, I have to say. But in my imagination, I feel it could be a lot slower, but then you're an artist and the patience of your audience at the same time. So maybe there's a happy medium in there if it's going to be a performative piece. But it's interesting when other people take pieces of your writing and make something different with it, because and it's reassuring when they see a depth there that you felt was there as well, that somebody else picks up on. Some of the pieces in this book have had music added to them, and at the same time they've taken away some of the words, which is absolutely fine by me, but they've obviously felt there's a resonance in some of the lyric, I suppose you could say, that bridges to another part in the poem, and so they filled that space with sound and silence rather than with words and words and words. So
the other thing I just wanted to say up front was just, it reminds me of how the vowel is the breath of the word, how it's, you can't, you have to have the vowel to have a breath. You know, that's where the air comes through.
Yeah.
I really heard that in this poem.
And I like the sound of the end. That's a sigh of relief. It's a sigh of, you've been tense and now you're unclenching. It's also the blow of the whale. So that sound covers a lot. It's an omnipresent sound.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's another aspect, of course, of the uncanny of the hair standing, and we're thinking about the whale populations, you know, and the more than human world, and how, in a way, it's like a call and response.
Yeah.
And what are we asked? Like, what is our response going to be to
The wounding.
the wounding and the disappearing of, you know, species?
Yeah, it's funny, I forgot that I brought you visual aids, which are in my bag, but every so often there's a whale that is washed up on the beach, just up and down the coast, and so I have a fine collection of whale bones, and one was a minke whale, a baby minke whale was washed up already dead, and I got its ear bone that it listens through. The whale doesn't use its ears to listen, it listens through the body. It's called bone sound.
Do we want to get the whale bone?
Do you
Somebody
want to-
could maybe hand your bag? Is it?
There it's just there. Sorry everybody listening at home.
Yes, I think we need to see that.
Sorry, I should have put this
So
on
you're
before.
traveling with a whale bone in your bag so we can better hear.
Oh, you see. There we go.
So minke whale is a type of whale.
It's a baleen whale, so it's a filter feeder. So there we go, here's one of them. And here's the other. So, wow, this is the bulla. So that's the bulla from the minke whale, and you can see it's a bit like a shell. But because the whale has to withstand such depths, I'm happy to pass it around if anybody wants to have a look. It's a very, very solid piece, and once you burn the whale, when the whale's processed and the bones are all boiled down, that's one of the last pieces to survive because it's so solid, and that contains the eardrum and all the actual processes, the soft tissues of hearing. But the whale hears through its body, the vibrations pass through water and through the skin, through the bones, and then because that bulla is, for us, the same, the equivalent is just behind your ear, but for the toothed whale, it's in your jaw, and for the baleen whales, it's just almost in the same place attached to your skull. So the sound moves through that bone into their skull. There, the bulla. There was a point to me telling you this. What did you ask me about that now? Oh yeah,
The loss of
Call and
the
response.
species.
Yeah, and it's unsettling in a sense that that's the last piece that's left, the listening apparatus. You know, once you boil the rest down, that's the last bit to disintegrate, in a sense. So the other piece I brought for you was this one. The whale doesn't use its tongue to speak. It moves air around pockets inside its head. People speculate this is what happens. Of course, there's no way to observe this in action, but that's what people think happens. And so because we use our tongues for all these very complicated noises, all these consonants and vowels and grunts and whistles and all the other sounds that we make, our tongue muscles are very complex, and we have a bone that's a sort of a horseshoe shape that sits at the back here that anchors all these muscles. The whale doesn't need its tongue for anything other than making a bolus and swallowing. So its hyoid bone, this mammal bone, is like a boomerang, it's straight. And I found that on the beach as well, and it's almost a perfect fluke. I thought, what a coincidence that is.
That's like the tail.
It looks like a tail,
yeah.
yeah. That was one
But
of the
it
neighbours
goes
said, the
here.
tailbone's on the beach. And I thought, tailbone?
small.
Yeah, but that said what it uses for its tongue. That's a tongue bone, so
That's a
people are around as
bone
well.
of the whale.
There you go. Visual aids.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
But yeah, in these whale poems, you're absolutely right. I don't think we could talk about whales now without thinking of their situation and how we have infringed on their world. And so I think that is one reason why I focus so much on the sound of the whales, because in a sense it's one way in which we can start to be slightly aware of their world, even though the sounds that they make are made over a much longer time span and are made at pitches that we can't hear. They're 99.99% out with our sensory apparatus, but very slightly we hear part of it, and much of our response to whales and our emotional response and aesthetic response is built on that tiny part that we can access, which in a sense is quite conceit, that we set aside the rest of it or don't acknowledge, that vast bulk of their sensory and social world, that we just don't have the apparatus or the scientific apparatus or the sensory apparatus to access. So it's that whole unknown that we don't know how we're affecting that troubles me as well, that appears in the poems quite often.
Yeah, I noted with the cage piece that at the time he wrote that piece, there was a lot of news around the disappearing population of whales. And, of course now it's more. So I thought about that. I'm so interested in what you're saying about listening, about the only piece that's left is the hearing, and then we can hear some whale song, but then there's some that we can't hear, but we know that it's there, just like in the poem. Getting back to the page, it's so much is evoked in few words that isn't said, that that is there, just in the end words: wound, hunt, raft, fall, reach, and so on.
Well, the terminology, I feel like it's also an argument for silence, exactly as you say, that silence in between is structural, as the words that are there to prop the silences up, in a sense.
I had a question about one of the things that I was so interested in this poem is when, the first part is like woo as in wound. You really hear the echo, and then it sort of, in a way, it sort of departs because it's like I think you said as in reach, but so like the short e to the long e, it starts to sort of devolve. I mean, separate some of the words, some of the letters from the actual word that you use. Like it sort of drifts apart. Like, do you want to talk about that at all?
I'm thinking of the sounds that are also part of the language of the men on the boat as well. So, there is of the sound world that is there at the time. There are, grunts and odd words said by the men on the boat. There's the sounds made by the whale. There's the sounds made in the weather and the noise of the boat across the water. So all these same sounds, or these same consonants and syllables, are being made by all these active agents in the soundscape, I suppose, in a sense.
Amazing.
Yeah. And you also want the whale to escape at the end, So I put,
have you been out on a whale boat?
No, I've seen whales. I'm very lucky. I've been places where they appeared. Although the best sighting I had was on the Northlink ferry, which was a big noisy ferry crossing over the Pentland Firth, and that is the best one that I've seen. So that was just happenstance. You can spend a lot of money going on a whaling trip and see nothing, or you can, pay 20 quid to get on a ferry. Look outside the cafe window. So just luck. But that's how it should be. So,
Fantastic. Well, we could say a lot more about this poem, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about rune poem. So let's continue. And it would be great to hear you read that, and then we can talk about it.
These rune poems, this form, I really like. The Icelandic rune poem is an old form, and the shape of the poem is that they take the letters of the runic alphabet, and it's officially it's a way of remembering your runic alphabet. So they've given you mnemonic rhymes so that you can do this. But the different definitions that they give for, or the different ways of remembering each letter of the runic alphabet, in the Icelandic and the old medieval ones, they're slightly metaphorical. There's a lot of onomatopoeia goes on, and a lot of alliteration. So they're already, approaching these, in a very figurative way. And I use this form for these words from a whaling glossary, because these are words that feel they should be known to us, but maybe we don't quite know what they mean, but then it opens out it opens the door for all the other half meanings of words that you carry around in your head. And when somebody uses a word that you don't know the meaning of, and you think, I think I should know that, I kind of know that, all the possible meanings are rehearsed before you settle on the one that fits this context. So it's just a way of opening up the sound world of all these words that are very, very old themselves. So rune poems. That's the bulla as well. I'm glad I brought a bulla for you. Bulla, a talisman, a genus of mollusk with thin, fragile shells, of whales the middle ear. Fall, rain blowing over, the first sighting of a whale, to become pregnant. Blink, of cloud, a streak of lucid whiteness, a trick, a stratagem, to close the eye. Sish, a crush between pans of ice, a rimming and grinding, a corpse, probably female. Tump, a tumulus, a friction knot, a tide lump, a varro. Tract, an anthem, of birds the contour feathers, to haul or tow, to bore through. Scart, a cormorant, a cirrus cloud, the mark of ink on paper. Sound, a deep sleep without dreams, to touch the seabed, to strike or blow.
Beautiful. Okay, Leanne, pick any one and just riff.
Well, I mean, just generally, I love how it's like a dictionary, like your creative dictionary, like your own personal dictionary of these words. I think I'm really attracted to the tract and anthem. I never noticed that an anthem that repeats. That I love that word anthem, and that's such a beautiful echo of an anthem, like just one anthem. Like anthems are huge and large and sung in these big churches, but like this is one particular anthem. So it's like part of the whole family of anthems, but it's an anthem of birds, the contour feathers. To haul or tow, to bore through. So that's a more obscure meaning to me. Like, I hear the anthem of birds, the conference of the birds, but then it's like this boring through. I'm not sure how that relates to tract. So I'd love to hear more about that. Like, maybe a tract, an intestinal tract. Inside.
Yeah. Well, you see, all these things are true. It's all true. It's all true. Tract was what they called the whalers called if they were caught in the ice, and they had huge ice saws, and with somebody on either end, or maybe 2 or 3 people with a rope on either end, and they took turns at pulling.
Like traction?
I suppose, that's where traction, like a traction saw, and they cut a channel through the ice, and then the boat could move another few yards, so that was called to tract. But it's probably linked to traction. But then, because of the way they used it, it became, part of the jargon, or part of the unofficial language of whaling. So
what about the birds and the feathers?
That's because I encounter all these things through books and through reading. I spend a lot of time looking up the meanings and derivations and etymologies of words, and in the Oxford English Dictionary, which everybody should read twice a day, they give you all these very old meanings of words that have fallen by the wayside, but are still there somehow in our general consciousness of what a word might mean. And a tract is a technical term for the feathers, the contour feathers, which I never knew. But a lot of people, a lot of poets also talk about how when you use a word in a language, you're surreptitiously importing all the previous meanings and all the previous usages of a word into your renewal of that word in this particular context that you're using it. I'm not the first to say that. That's Seamus Heaney was a great exponent, the master of this, because he was a multilinguist. He would often be able to use languages that were half his own normative language and half Greek, so that he could open out this very domestic world he was talking about into something much wider. Obviously, he was very clever at writing across languages, and so was Edwin Morgan. There's a great quote by Edwin Morgan when he was talking about he and Hugh McDermott were discussing how only a tiny fraction of the human brain is used, and Edward Morgan had said, yes, I think language is like that too. I think we only use the surface of it. There's a 99% of it there that, you know, we slide across, but it's there stirring underneath, you know, the language that you use. So
But tract is also like a manifesto, like a tractate, like a belief. You know?
Yes. That's right, yeah.
So you're saying this is what you believe about language. Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your poetics. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I was hearing that image of an anthem, connecting it to an anthem of birds. So now I'm imagining the tract in the water or the ice, and it's filled with birds, which I know that's not. It's just an interesting image that just occurred in the conversation.
Yeah, the northern birds, the Iceland gulls, and the gulls that were there, and the fulmars and things, yeah. And also the fulmars followed the whale ships for all the oil that oozed out of the seams or bits that were thrown over the sides, so they were very noisy places for the...
Like the conference of the birds, like a meeting of birds, everybody.
And this idea of so much of the language that is not used, that you just brought into the room via Edward Morgan, I think this poem is also an argument that it's inside each word is this vastness that we are not touched, we don't remember. If we're not reading the OED 10 times a day, we're just using words as if they only have one surface or two surfaces. When actually there's this whole elaborate world that is an infinity kind of in each
like
word.
An ocean.
And that kind of focus made me think about Zhukovsky's saying that the story has to be in every word or it doesn't go on. Right? But even we could reduce it to the character, each letter in any alphabet, it can also be this infinite storehouse of connotations.
And going back to the first, what we're saying about Futharks, about the runic alphabet, the letters of the alphabet were also thought to have agency. They were also thought to be animated or animate. So,
which is true of a lot of, if we look at the history of alphabets, which is so fascinating, it's true in a lot that the alphabets create the world and the primordial matter that have their own existence,
They were animated in sound or in the illustrative ways, or like how are they? I want to know more about the animated letters.
well, there's maybe people in this room that know more about it than I do, but as I understand that the Vikings, for example, when they came over, would often ascribe a message in runes or even a room just to mark this place magically as their own. You know, it brought a power with it in a sense. It wasn't just an I am here kind of gesture. It was something, it's almost like a talisman, I suppose you would say. I remember in the National Museum in Edinburgh, down in the basement, they had an exhibition of early writing where the marks, were they runes or were they from some other alphabet, weren't organised into a word, but somebody had just thought, I shall, render this place magical, I shall invoke the power of, writing was a powerful thing. And so just to invoke that power, they had put just letters there, even though the letters weren't actually organised to make a word. So they weren't used as tools, they were used as, I don't know if the word is talismans, but they were used as a magical thing to put in that place.
But synchronicity is happening, because I was just thinking, I want to talk about the first one next, and then you said talismans, and then you said it again, talismans. So let's look closely at Bola, which I'm curious about the multiplicity of meanings. When I looked it up, I found bubble, blister, lesion, or in archaeology, kind of a clay envelope that's hollow. Also amulet or seal came up, but maybe I'm sure there's more to that. Bola.
It can also, I mean, these words can also mean what you feel they should mean as well. You know, you use them when you're reaching for words. You can use them imaginatively to advance your argument or to, you know, describe your thinking. And so, you know, you're refreshing the meaning of the word in a sense, so you don't have to be restricted to past uses. And, you know, that's how language works. You know, it morphs all the time.
Like Cecilia Vicuña's practice of like sort of creative etymology is where she just hears parts of the word and then just starts to riff on the sound and makes new words out of it. That, creating that. Yeah.
Of course, people wiser than myself have said, well, this is a job of poets, you know, to refresh language, you know, to make it new.
A talisman, a genus of mollusk with thin, fragile shells of whales, the middle ear. So there we are back to the whalebone and the hearing. And when I read this one, I'm thinking about the actual physical runes that could be made of shells, or they could be made of bones. Leanne, what is it when you read that? What associations? Where do you go with bulla?
Well, I think of a bull, but that's like an ancient Mithras cult of the, you know, the maize and the sacrificial bull. But that seems like that's a very creative etymology because I think it's a different language root and system. But like that's what I heard first when I heard bulla, like bulla.
But not too far in a sense, because you know, you can't say that word bulla or bulla without, you know, putting a bit of oomph into it. You know, you have to have bulla. You have to really emphasise the first bit, and it is such a strong bone. You know, that's probably why those two syllables felt right to go with that bit of bone. I'm guessing. You know, they couldn't have given it a very delicate name that you had to pronounce carefully. It had to be something tough. So. You know, it's not too far, perhaps.
When whales, do they call them cows and bulls and things? I don't know. I think the calf, like how they like cows.
Yeah,
like
they
herd,
do. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And interestingly, like ships, you know, ships at sea are female. They refer to a ship as she. Whales also are she when they're being hunted quite often. It's like whether it's a male or female whale, she, you know, advanced ahead of us. In fact, I took them out for a poem from old whaling days. I spent a lot of time sitting in archives reading old whaling journals, which are wonderful. And this particular one, as I was reading through, I realised I started to trip. It's like stubbing your toe. I started to trip over every time when Captain Barron was describing these whaling voyages of his youth. When he, every time he used she of the whale, because he, I mean, this was written in another time, so he was unrepentant really about the number of whales that they killed. It was another time, and it was an economic. You know, it was their mode of income, and you know, attitudes to animals were different, and so on and so forth. But I couldn't get over. After a while, I started to get quite angry or annoyed or something about she this, she that, especially when they phrased it. It's almost like the language of courtship. You know, she led us a nice dance, but you know, and so I had to. My only way to make peace with this was to separate out or to take out all these stories about she and set them aside, and they became a series of short poems, and then I could make my peace with the rest of the text and read it through for what it was. So yeah, she.
Wow. Leanne, do you want to choose one more to close read, and I have a couple other questions?
I'm interested that shish, a crush between pans of ice, a rimming, a grinding, a corpse, probably female. So that probably goes with what you were talking about, female. But shish, I've never heard that word really.
It's the noise that it makes. So
like an onomatopoeia.
The last one is a word for a female whale, a dead whale. I don't know if it's universally used, but I saw it used in the journals in the archive in Dundee, so it might have been a local term for it.
So corpse of a whale, not a person.
Shish, the word shish itself.
Yeah. there was a shush, on the beach, a shush or something like this, I suppose.
Yeah,
it was.
it's like shush. It sounds like they're dead and quiet.
Yeah,
They're like,
yeah.
But it also, yeah.
There's a sense of deflation and there's a sense of collapse, isn't there? Yeah. But yeah, the first one, some of these I have to say I also invented because, that as you're allowed to do that as poets.
Yeah.
But you're allowed to run with it. And
Is it a secret which ones you invented? Or can you share?
I'm guessing a crush between pans of ice. I'm guessing I invented
And
that
that's the one I
Yeah.
thought was the meaning immediately.
Oh,
It's
well.
like the game of
It's like a dictionary game when you
Yes.
Yeah.
make up a definition and you try to
Right.
trick everybody. Like,
Yeah. There was a programme, maybe some people remember it, called Call My Bluff on BBC Two with Robert Robinson. That was great, I loved that. And everybody had read out a meaning of this very obscure word, and everybody would be straight face, and at the end, you opened your envelope and it said true or bluff, and you got a point. So we used to play that. It says a lot about my upbringing, but there you go.
That's a great game.
Good fun, yeah. Fun game. Robert Robinson was a funny guy. Anyway.
So question, so the title being Rune Poems, I'm really curious of the relationship between divination and writing in this poem or in general in your work, your interest or not interest in divination. Especially because we talked about Cage, and
Yeah.
Cage is really interested in chants.
Yes. I'm guessing, I know there are poets in the audience that might want to add to this, but I feel the whole process of writing poetry is, it must be, now that you've said that, it must be, at least 51% divination. Your medium is language, and, your tool is language, and you're going to use language, and also the object of the book with its white space and its shapings and its spacings. So that's the tools that you're working with, but the actual poem itself in all its meanings and all its sense and everything that rises up off the page, that must be divination. I think is a good word for it, because you're relying so much on your intuition on what words fit the sense that you have, and poetry is quite often said to in the way that it disrupts grammatical rules and disrupts meanings and disrupts your expectations of layout and all the other things you think of language, in its will to disrupt, and in its the free rein with which poets use this capacity to disrupt. It gives you that ability to talk about things that are maybe just beyond the edge of normative language, or Jory Graham's, she's a great one for this, in that she uses a huge amount of repetition and a huge amount of struggling to word, and often her words end in just failure to word. They just end, or they condense. She conveys that sense of, I haven't got language to capture this, or language, we're now in a zone where language can fail. Language fails because we are beyond language now, in this thing that I'm describing to you, and she shows that, and other poets do as well, in just a literal collapse of language on the page. She shows that graphically. So I think divination is a great word for it, for the work of the poet.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. Thank
Yeah.
you. Well, I'm just checking the time. I have one more question I want to ask, but first I want to ask Leanne if you have any question you want to ask, or direction you want to point to, or
well, just one thing I was noticing about just that both poems have this great double column work, and I don't know a lot about your other work, but that's I don't know if that was unique to these two poems, but I love that how you have these things down, and then it's gap like a caesura, and you have this like column response amongst within the poem. Do you I don't know a lot about your work spatially on the page. Do you do that more in other places? Do you want to talk about that practice? Or?
Yes, I do. Not necessarily in a very pictorial, graphic way, but I think we who write are always very conscious of how much white space should surround, of the white space that is that's there before you start to read a line, in that half second or that your eye takes to go from the end of this word down to the start of the next line. That's all. You're metering the poem. You're metering the reader's reading of the poem by how you use the white space. whether it's in your line breaks, or whether it's in white space that you introduce within a line, or whether it's in white space you use by separating out parts of your writing. All this is metering the reader's reading of the poem, so it's a way to try and control how they hear it in the voice in their head, in a sense. So yes, I'm very conscious of where the white space appears and how it is out. I have long email dialogues with printers about, oh, can you make it just a bit further? Oh, we'll go back the way you were, or it needs to, all these kind of things I think are all important, because a book of poetry is a visual thing as well as, something that you're going to read, an oral thing. So.
No, I really love the sonic and the graphic resonances and how they're both there. Like it's very expanded off the page like that.
I think it comes back to the importance of listening as well, and it's great that we're having this conversation in such an echoey room, everything we say is so important, or, you feel it'll be in these walls for a long time until after we've gone. But I think it is very, very important to, these days especially, the importance of listening has become more and more acute, in a sense. Other poems in the book focus on or talk about our soundscape and the white noise that's there that maybe lines your world, and maybe is the sound that you modulate your voice against. We had a quick chat about Roseanne Watt, and when I was looking at her poems, she has this lovely line in one poem about the Shetlandic consonants being like stones that you spit out of your mouth, and their mouth wet when they land on the ground.
Wait, can you say that one more time? That's
What poet? What poet?
Roseanne Watt.
Oh, Roseanne Watt, who's we're going
okay.
to discuss later today.
Yeah.
But what you just said about the stones in the mouth and the original language, can you say that one more time? That's
Yeah,
amazing.
in the Roseanne Watt poem, I'll need to find out which one it was again, but she talks about, it might be in the introduction to her collection, she talks about how the Shetlandic consonants are, the vowels are very open there, and I know from listening that, an A is sometimes an E or an E, depending on what other vowel sounds have been in the rest of the sentence. But the consonants are very hard, and she likens them to stones that you're spitting out your mouth, and they're still mouth wet, landing on the ground. Anyway, this has stuck in my mind because I really do feel that we must modulate our voice, and there must be a reason why accents have remained so distinct to place. And I wonder if it's something to do with the soundscape of that place. If you do modulate how you speak and how you pace your words and how you use rhythm, and where you hear rhyme, if you do modulate that according to the soundscape that you are in, that you've grown up in, and that your language has grown in. So
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know.
That's so fabulous, and I just love this emphasis on listening that is in this whole conversation in your work, and I feel like it's why we're here, why we're all here, why we're interested in poetry, why we read and write poetry, is because it cultivates this listening space where we're present, and maybe that's why we're so drawn to poetry. I don't know. That listening. Amazing. Okay, I have one more question. I want to ask Leanne and then let you have the final word about it. But so I love this epigram to the rune poem. The text, commonly called the Icelandic rune poem, is only a poem by courtesy. And that's a quote from R.I. Page Viking Society for Northern Research, 1999, which is the epigraph to the poem. When I looked this up, I found that piece, and that was like the very first sentence. I was like, I love it so much, and I'm so curious about this idea of something is a poem by courtesy only. What does that mean? How do we understand that? Do we agree or disagree? What is that? So
Well, to me, I felt like it was a found poem. Like it was already, it was a thing that was for use, and it was born of another impulse. But we see it as a poem. It's also a poem. It's a special poem because it was created in this other way. So that's sort of what I got. The courtesy of the words to be a poem.
Yeah.
It's like,
I got that, and then it made me wonder, well, isn't any poem just a poem by courtesy? And what does that mean exactly? So if it's found, or if we say we wrote it, we're still using words and alphabets and echoes and resonances that are also found, whether we're conscious or not found, conscious or unconscious. So, like what are all poems by courtesy? So I'm just love that. I'm really curious about your thoughts.
I like that sense of using alphabets and using language. There's a courtesy in there. I have borrowed this for my particular purposes. I like that sense of, hey, we should make another rune poem about courtesy. We could give evenings out of this. But I like that. I was thinking that line jumped out at me because I use a lot of different forms. Occasionally my poems are quite narrative and quite easy to read out, and sometimes they have to be. It's a visual thing rather than it would be impossible to read aloud. There's one where it's a map, and I've made a map about wheel strandings and the places where the wheels have stranded kind of crash across the page. I don't know how I might read that out. But I think this a poem by courtesy is me squaring myself up against people that feel that a poem should be a certain shape and it should have certain features in order to become a poem, because I'm sure there isn't any definition these days of the word poem that everybody would agree on, now that we use white space as much as anything, and now that we use images interspersed with the text, and now that we crash the text or reverse the text or all these things. So the idea of a poem by courtesy was a phrase that jumped out, especially as this just looks like a section of a dictionary, even though I've tampered with it hugely. So
fantastic. All right, so we have a little bit more time, and I wonder if there's anything you want to read in addition.
Just to
you have like 8 minutes.
Oh, there we go. Well,
whatever
8 minutes,
you
but
want.
There's here we go. Here we are. This is one of my favourites. I lived in Orkney for a couple of years on the island of Edie, and there's a folk tale that belongs to that one island over, Rousey, and it's about this girl who she got up in the morning and went out to collect the pizza up the hill with the cattle or whatever, and she just never came back. And of course that's an archetypal structure of so many folk tales and myths, all around the world. Children have gone into a forest and not returned, or they have returned differently. And of course it's the archetypal shape of the whole story of whaling. These men go off over the horizon, and if they do return, they return changed. But of course underneath this story there's a perfectly ordinary story of a girl that went out one morning, and she might have just got on the boat to Kirkwall, or the other version of the tale has her she met a man and off they went, or she maybe just met an accident, maybe she was blown off a cliff or something. So it amuses me that how we make stories out of very ordinary things, and how we charge very ordinary things with all this meaning. So I rehearsed the story of this girl going, and in the folktale she goes off to the island of Heather Blether, which is sometimes visible in certain lights of the island of Einhallow, away out to the west, and her father goes and finds her there, and of course she's living a different life when she gets there. So Heather Blether. 1. How in the bright morning air, crossing the road with the world about her, the morning unusually still and sunny, the islands laid flat below the cloud, she took the peat road up the hill, now right, then left, now right, following a line, still rising in a kind of dance, moving without hindrance, growing smaller and smaller. The wind now cold, the shore road blurring with sand, the sun clouding over, there for a moment, then vanished. Har, the latent heat of seawater. 2. Grinding up on a shallow beach as the tide draws back, leaving them stranded, lurching and heaving, sliding over kelps as they lug the boat onto the turf, falling against its sides, now stretched and sprawling, the coarse grass hollow at their backs, exhaling gasps of pollen, small dry heat, now shading their eyes against the glim as the waves tilt mirrors at them, the sea settling for a while, the sea sliding between rocks, as sweat slicks and cools down their backs, their hands and necks slowly uncurling as the tedium of hours of rowing gradually falls away. Noon, the sun absent, the island tranced in heat. Now sleep creeps over them, rosy blue in the distance, the wind in abeyance, the wind abstracted. There, in the angle of a wall, singing the old lullabies, her bowed neck, the fall of her hair as she nurses her own child, latching him to her in the nap of her shawl, now putting him to sleep to watch him dream, the privacy between them deep and complete. She motions them to silence, rocking him slowly with the waves rise and fall, her song more a dream of music, almost inaudible, more thought than sung, like wind through grass, a quiet in itself, or swans keening northwards in high clinking syllables, trailing off in fine pale grey, now low and distant, full of sea longing, as somewhere near the tide turns, and 4 figures rise and turn for home. The story is told of an island, invisible in rain or sunlight, at sunset a flake on the horizon, in winter a silhouette, like a boat, far out, weightless and emptied.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you again for being
Pleasure.
here, and thank you to Colin Hurd for organizing it. We hope you feel better soon.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming.
There are some books for sale at the back, and I'm sure you can have them signed if you'd like to. And here next week, same time, same place, it's Iphigenia Browne next week, which will be another great session. But that was an amazing hour of close reading and close listening for us, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you.